You clicked the video, I made the video, let's get right into it. On your screen are two games with a parry mechanic. One of them showcases everything wrong with it, and the other, well, it's Sekiro. Parrying isn't new. It's been around since games like Street Fighter 3 and Bushido Blade in the 80s and early 2000s, but somewhere along the way, this skill-expressive, high-stakes, high-reward mechanic that was a dopamine rush for those willing to get stomped by a boss's attack had the worst thing happen to it. It started trending. So what's the deal? Why does every modern game seem obsessed with parrying? Why do so many titles wind up feeling empty? And honestly, why does parrying, when developers actually nail it, feel so insanely good? Parrying's been around for ages. You could spot it in old games like the mysterious Murasame Castle and Prince of Persia. Not the acrobatic Hollywood version, I'm talking about the ancient Lawrence of Arabia looking Prince of Persia, which, weirdly enough, kickstarted one of the biggest franchises in the early 2000s. Let me know in the comments if you were around for this peak moment in gaming. But here's the thing, back then, parrying wasn't the star of the show. The windows were super tight, the reward for landing it was barely worth the effort, and sometimes you just kinda had to figure it out on your own, because more often than not, there weren't dedicated tutorials. And why would there be? Parrying was just an option that at most 10% of the players would ever encounter, and an even fewer contingent would spend the time to develop the skill necessary to utilize it. This would be like Pokemon having a tutorial about shiny Pokemon in the older games. I remember hearing across the playground about people with a shiny Pidgey or something, and everyone rushed over to get a glimpse at the awesomeness they held. The mystery of this unknown mechanic added to its legendary status, and for parries, it's sort of no different. But skip ahead 40 years, and now you can't escape it. Parrying's totally everywhere, and I've got it pinned down to three main reasons behind why game designers lean into the mechanics so hard. First up, artificial depth. At the core of action games, you can attack, defend, and dodge. I think we can all agree on that so far. But where a game creates an identifiable and lasting legacy is through the lengths developers are willing to go to push their systems, innovate, and allow you to fully reap the rewards of exploring their implemented systems. Design depth. Parrying takes two of the three pillars of action games, attacking and defending, throws the Batara earrings on them, and challenges us as try-hard players to stand tall in the face of a Lovecraftian horror's abyssal onslaught, armed with nothing but a butter knife, and told to stand your ground against something that wants you absolutely dead. It's unmitigated cinema. In theory, as a developer, you've done your job. You've added another layer of combat to your game. Congratulations, you underpaid king, but most games get this aspect horribly wrong. Introducing the entire Assassin's Creed series. This punching bag for video essays will not escape, even in the big 2026. I won't dare speak poorly about the Ezio trilogy or even the original, mostly because of nostalgia, and partly because I suspect many members of my audience haven't played them, but absolutely because the modern iterations in this series are sort of the poster child for what is wrong with this system. The modern AC games try to pack in as much baseline level content as they possibly can, which can end up feeling like a fulfilling system, or in our case, help perpetuate a flawed one. Their crime? One, admittedly they aren't the sole perpetrator of, visual and obscene color-coded highlights. At the surface, this doesn't seem like an awful implementation, but what it effectively does is strip down the system and offers a free pass to a flashy finisher and the swift end to combat. Immediately, upon seeing the tutorial for yellow can be blocked and red means parry or dodge, every combat encounter from that moment on is in the control of the game developer. They've now trained the brain to see a stimulus, the colored attacks, and have a built-in response to deal with it. At that point, you can replace every enemy with a flashing traffic light and the experience wouldn't change. Why build deeper systems when you've already given the player the fastest path to victory? That's right, you wouldn't waste the limited time or resources available because that time instead needs to be put into optimal placement for the 6,000 collectibles scattered across the massive maps. Sure, this might sound like I'm speaking from the peak of Mount Elitist, but what we've lost in this exchange is nuanced gameplay, varied attacks, and smarter AI for brainless slop that often just spams the same attack with a different color. The point of parrying is to express your mastery over the game, having spent time to unlock the ability to pull off their harrowing maneuvers after studying enemy attacks or just being so locked into the controls that of course you exploited those tight windows, and for that, you were only then rewarded with the sweet finisher awaiting you. Now, to be fair, not all highlighted systems are bad, and undoubtedly some games have made great use of them, but those games were built from the ground up for that mechanic. Prime example, the Batman Arkham series, or to a lesser extent, the Shadow of Mordor games. In those games, we're given highlighted indicators, but the skill expression is keeping up with the mental load of being swarmed by a dozen enemies, all attacking asynchronously. Without a parrying mechanic, you'd be chipped down and beaten in every encounter because at some point, dodge rolling or spamming the attack button just fails to continue working. These games were built built with parrying in mind, and were fine-tuned to allow us as players to feel challenged while also not feeling like bashing our heads into the wall at every encounter. That brings us to the second pillar, inflated skill ceilings. Games like Ninja Gaiden were known the world over for having an insanely high skill floor and ceiling, and that one guy in the neighborhood who could beat it was known by everyone, by name, because that kind of skill couldn't be faked. What's the modern equivalent for this? For the players who enjoy a bit of difficulty when gaming, have that sense of mechanical acuity and satisfaction from conquering a game's many systems. I guess you could bump the difficulty, but that really just amounts to being one shot and fighting normal enemies with HP bars that dwarf most bosses. Game developers can't just ignore those players, that's lost revenue. So what do? They crank up the skill ceiling, making the game feel tougher to master than it really is. Basically, they create the illusion of skill through the use of parry mechanics. Honestly, most of the time you're just playing a timing minigame, hit the button right, and you feel like you pulled off something incredible. Miss it, skill issue. After you've nailed it a few times, you're suddenly convinced that you're a parry god, and that pushes you to keep grinding. And that's the trick. You've just boosted their dedicated player-based metric, all because they dropped in a quick and dirty mechanic. The rest of the game might not even care about skill, but that one feature keeps you hooked. Games like Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor I think do this fairly well, because you're either going to engage with their shallow but extremely stimulating system of dealing with enemies, or you're going to be pounding your lightsaber into the healthiest damage sponges I've seen in the entire Star Wars universe. Like, in the grand, expansive lore of Star Wars, the best we could come up with to dealing with non-force sensitive enemies is this. Remember the Force Unleashed series? How are these games a decade apart? They already have the blueprint available to them to create a complex and successful combat system, but instead, because parries are easier and more cinematic, why hire someone to code in actually cool pieces of gameplay that helped create a legendarily memorable series? That'd be too hard. They'd have to watch YouTube videos for inspiration or something. That finally brings us to the third pillar, style over substance. Once a game nails that deep-looking system and makes you feel like a skilled player, substance isn't really the point anymore. What matters most is style. I call this the solo leveling theorem. Everything looks jaw-dropping, every move feels loaded with power, finishes come with dramatic slow-mo, splashes of particle effects, screen shake, and everything you can post in an aura farming montage on YouTube to show your friends. For a moment, you feel like you're being directed by Zack freaking Snyder, and it's awesome. Honestly, that's not always a bad thing. Games should make you feel amazing. They should give you those cool visuals, because that's part of the fun. But if style replaces substance entirely, everything starts to fall apart. You don't need strong systems anymore or meaningful interactions. You just need to make the player feel like they did something epic. And once you pull that off, you've just saved your multi-billion-dollar publisher a few dollars. The most egregious example I could think of is Insomniac's Spider-Man games. So, we're Spider-Man, right? A character with a rich and developed history whose powers are derived from spiders, the flimsy, agile creatures with a size-to-strength ratio that borderlines insane. These creatures, despite their reputation for inspiring some of the most common phobias, for being generally kind of horrific, are pretty docile and risk-avoidant. And this supposed Spider-Man has a built-in power that alerts him to danger that is appropriately named Spider Sense. So why in the name of Green Goblin does this character have a dedicated parry? Wouldn't it make, sense for this game to be an expression of his agility, cunning, and intellect rather than just brute forcing enemies, catching their punches, and locking the player in what is effectively forced cutscenes every time we want to interact with one of the game's systems? I genuinely hate the fact that we have 3 Spider-Man games where Spider-Man parries normal-ass grunts instead of whipping around the area being Spider-Man. The character's identity is being blurred by the necessity of this mechanic, and we really might as well be playing as Captain America with webs, an Insomniac game. Before I blow a fuse, let me ask you, dear viewer, if so many games fail to capitalize well on the concept, why does parrying still feel so damn good? Let me show you. It should be no surprise that a game like Sekiro is a highlight standout feature in any video talking about parrying, and this game nearly single-handedly created this trend for every game to have a parry. Let's be honest, it's not just the dopamine-triggering sound design that is so satisfying to land, nor is it just the fluid animations that make every single fight feel like a dance. It's definitely not just the fact that they built the entire game around this design and made it integral to how you and the boss interacts. It's everything in this game's identity that makes the mechanic work so damn well. In other, lesser games, if you go for parries, that's on you, Chief. The boss wasn't designed for this interaction, so you've had to take it into your own hands to force this mechanic onto an enemy that wasn't intended to be fought this way. But Sekiro bosses have intentionality. The tempo and flow of the battle was almost choreographed to feel like a back and forth between 2 dancing warriors. Parrying isn't just a means to an end and a flashy finisher. It's your way of arresting control from the boss and weaponizing their offense for your purposes. Sure, most bosses can be defeated without interacting with the system, but that's like saying well, should technically one-shot most people he fights because he's a Viltrumite. Like, sure, that's correct, but it's missing the point of what the show is trying to give you as an experience. And this all goes without saying that the technical design of how the frame data of Sekiro is as close to perfect as we've seen in a game is mind-blowing. I don't think it's a secret that, yes, you can technically spam the parry button and get away with a lot in most boss fights. You'll absolutely be punished more than if you actively were looking to parry a specific attack, rather than just playing Carpal Tunnel Syndrome 2026. But the intentionality of giving the parry a very low action delay, huge windows of active frames when your character is parrying, paired with the aforementioned silky smooth animations, creates a gameplay loop that, for all intents and purposes, is magical. When developers create tight control schemes, they allow both the player to express their individual level of skill in a really direct way, but also allow themselves to create challenging scenarios, knowing full well that they've created an environment that allows the player to overcome it with confidence. Want to know a game that does this extremely well? The concept of intentionality? Monster Hunter. The entire franchise is built around subtle cues and dancing around these beasts in order to find your window of opportunity. There aren't colored cues or a flashing indicator on your screen to guide your hand. You need to sit down and learn what the monsters are doing, and eventually you'll start reacting to the slightest twitch in their muscles like you've just killed your best friend and unlocked the Mangekyo Sharingan. And no better weapon exemplifies this like the longsword. Of course, the Weeb Simulator Parry Machine would make it onto my channel, because if you want to play the longsword, you are going to learn how to parry. And at no moment does Capcom sit you down, put your gamer glasses on, and hold your hand with highlighted attacks, prompts on the screen, or an NPC yelling, "Quick, hit the parry button to perform a devastating finisher," even though that does sound exactly like the handler. Yeah, but I'd be pretty sold on the game if this was its 6-second Super Bowl ad. I'd be lining up to throw my paycheck at them at any cost, because already what these devs have shown us is the perfect foil to what I was speaking about earlier: style over substance. Mind you, this is just the demo of the game, and we've already seen them throw out concepts like parrying nuclear explosions and, you know, gravity. A game that fully capitalizes on this concept is Ultra Kill. The developers implemented the parry mechanics so deeply into the game's core that you can parry your own shotgun shells. Like, what? The mechanics are so deeply ingrained into the identity of the game that it has created what can only be called a masochistic fan base of incredibly motivated and loyal individuals that I would not want to thumb wrestle with. The game mobilizes the deep human need to conquer difficult challenges and turns that dial to wumbo, because if you just peek into the Steam reviews, you'll see many players' accounts of the game's extreme difficulty as a positive. Dying to a section 1,000 times to the same group of enemies? Guess it's a skill issue, said every Ultra Kill madman. The parry mechanics are so insane that it gaslit nearly 150,000 people, a third of the population of Long Beach, California, into believing that it wasn't pain that they were experiencing, it was pure ecstasy. And there has to be something to that when games don't hand out participation trophies by giving you slowed down animations and a cool finisher after you've parried an enemy with enough visual indicators that people with blindness would be like, come on bro. But it's the risk of missing that parry and being met with a game over screen that keeps parries interesting. And if the game has a literal difficulty sliders to make parrying more achievable, well, what's the point in engaging with the enemy on screen at all? So what's the takeaway here? Most modern games don't give you real depth. They just make it look that way. The implemented systems seem complicated at first, but when you actually dig in, they usually come down to a handful of timing tricks that fool you into thinking you're getting better at the game. On top of that, developers throw a bunch of visual flair and dramatic cutscenes so every move feels epic, even when the game isn't really asking that much of you. And honestly, it works. Parrying feels awesome, so instead of designing mechanics that make you put in the work, a lot of games just hand you the dopamine right away. But then there are games that just nail it, like everything: enemies, timing windows, feedback, even the punishments for screwing up is so focused on making parrying something that you actually have to master. And that's the real difference. Most games know that you think parrying is cool, but the best ones know that they are pure bliss.